Welcome to today's edition of the IntoTexas AI podcast. It's your look at AI news and trends impacting Texas. I'm your host, Shannon Belew. Let's get started. This week in trending news, it continues to highlight that Texas is no longer simply participating in the AI economy. It's becoming one of the places where the AI economy is physically being built. The headlines this week return the focus on data centers, financing, power demand, workforce training, enterprise infrastructure, and the growing struggles between this economic growth and the impact on local communities. Today, we're breaking down 5 of the biggest AI stories shaping Texas during the week of May 4th, 2026. Let's get started. In our first story, we're taking a look at Meta's $13 billion El Paso data center financing package. It's the biggest AI infrastructure story in Texas this week, I think, which did come out of El Paso. And according to reports, Meta is working on roughly $13 billion of financing, a package that's tied to a massive AI-focused data center project in this region. You may recall that Meta was also once rumored to want to step into the Abilene data center campus when OpenAI and Oracle couldn't make that relationship work. So we're not entirely surprised to see this investment news for El Paso from Meta. It makes perfect sense, and the financial commitment alone is telling you something important. The era of AI infrastructure spending has not tapered off, and Texas is increasingly at the center of much of that spending. Now, El Paso may seem like an unexpected location to some people, but again, I think it makes strategic sense for all the same reasons it does across much of Texas. It's available land, it's access to energy infrastructure, and its proximity to key transportation routes, and there's room for long-term expansion as well. And remember, AI data centers are not normal data centers anymore. These facilities require enormous amounts of electricity, cooling, networking capacity, and specialized infrastructure. The scale is truly staggering, but some analysts now compare major AI infrastructure projects to the industrial build-outs of earlier economic eras, including those of railroads, oil refineries, semiconductor fabs, or telecom network. So that's the level of investment we're continuing to see, and Texas remains as one of the primary destinations for that build out. Now that leads us to our next story. Again, speaking of data centers, this one further reinforces that North Texas also continues to grow as a big AI infrastructure hub. So this week we saw an announcement that Dallas-based DataBank has secured $2 billion in construction financing to develop its new Red Oak, Texas campus. Now this is just south of Dallas. The project is said to span approximately 600,000 square feet and provide up to 480 megawatts of compute power. And it's going to feature 3 large-scale pre-leased AI data centers. They're DFW 9, 10, and 11. And these are said to be anchored by Oracle. So again, we're seeing a lot of the same names floating around. With high demand accelerating the project, the first phase of the campus is also expected to be completed by the end of 2026, according to reports out with the news this week. So I think this is another example of how quickly enterprise AI infrastructure demand is accelerating. And as more companies are entering, what's called the inference phase, meaning organizations, companies are deploying AI tools at scale across, everyday business operations, it requires massive computing infrastructure. And increasingly, companies want that infrastructure close to their customers, connected to strong energy grids, and located in business-friendly environments. Texas certainly continues to check all 3 of those boxes. And Oracle's continued expansion in Texas demonstrates that hyperscale AI infrastructure growth is not slowing down despite some recent economic uncertainty. In fact, it still may be accelerating. And that leads to another potential roadblock that comes with such high demand and rapid expansion, and that's lack of skilled labor. So perhaps one of the most interesting and also very important AI stories this week wasn't actually about software or technology at all. It was really about electricians. BlackRock announced a $30 million commitment to help train thousands of Texas electricians to support the growing data center and AI infrastructure boom. Now, this is also really interesting, and I think the story deserves more attention because it highlights one of the lesser discussed realities of AI expansion, and that's AI creating this physical labor demand as well. You know, last week there were some news across the state where reports were showing that the focus on data center construction and build out was pulling away from construction and in the housing area. So you're seeing, again, we've got limited skilled labor already, which includes, electricians, plumbers, lots of others, and in a market that was already tight and growing from a housing standpoint. And now you've got all of this huge data center infrastructure that has high demand, that needs rapid, quick development and expansion. And so you're really starting to see that an already scarce labor pool is really being further fragmented, and that's part of the problem. And, for years, if we think about it, when you talked about jobs around anything related to AI, those discussions, and largely today as well, right? We haven't totally moved away from this, but largely we focused on software engineers, data scientists, developers, fears about that white collar job automation, right? But we have to remember that AI infrastructure also requires, as I said, electricians, cooling specialists, fiber installers, construction workers, power system experts, and all sorts of industrial technicians. So in other words, the AI economy is creating a new kind of industrial workforce, and Texas may be one of the first states dealing with that level and pace of transformation. So this is especially important because many regions already face skilled labor shortages, as we talked about, and we're just piling on to that. You can build all the data centers you want on paper, but eventually you need the people who can physically construct, power, and maintain them, right? It's a necessity. And that's becoming one of the defining workforce challenges of the AI era. And it's another reason that Texas is emerging as such an important case study nationally, I think. So let's move to our next story this week, which also brought important news out of San Antonio, Texas. Rackspace Technology announced an expanded partnership with AMD focused on enterprise AI infrastructure and services. Now, the story represents a slightly different side of the AI economy rather than just those giant hyperscale data center projects that are grabbing all the headlines recently. But Rackspace, remember, is focused heavily on enterprise AI, regulated industries, cloud infrastructure, and managed AI services. So it's really helping organizations, helping those companies actually operationalize AI in their everyday workday. And that's where many companies are now struggling. We know the first wave of AI excitement was about experimentation, but the next phase is about deployment. It's governance, security, compliance, integration, and enterprise operations. And as we talk good bit about here in IntoTexas, it's about business outcomes. So that's where companies like Rackspace are trying to position themselves. And their partnership announced this week with AMD also highlights Texas' growing importance in that broader AI hardware ecosystem. So again, remember, Texas isn't just producing and supporting all of these AI startups. It's increasingly becoming home to infrastructure providers, semiconductor operations, enterprise AI platforms, and really large-scale deployment environments. And San Antonio has definitely thrown its hat into the ring to become one of the more important enterprise AI and cybersecurity markets in the country. And finally, this week, let's talk about where we see increasing signs that not everyone in Texas is fully embracing the rapid expansion of AI infrastructure. This is certainly not a new topic, but definitely ongoing. There were several reports out this week which highlighted growing resistance and concern from rural communities over these large-scale AI data center deployments and developments. The concerns, as you might expect, include water consumption, electricity demand, land usage, tax incentives, and just the overall environmental impact. So, this may become one of those really important long term AI stories in Texas and beyond. It's not going to go away, it's just going to continue to evolve. And while AI investment brings jobs and economic growth, communities are also beginning to ask, who absorbs the cost? And that question is becoming maybe more urgent as projects become larger and more energy intensive, and frankly, wider spread across these rural areas in particular of Texas. So, this is the complicated reality of industrial scale AI expansion. That technology may feel digital, but the infrastructure behind it is deeply physical. As we repeatedly reinforce here, it requires land, power, water, construction, and major public infrastructure support. Texas is now beginning to experience all of these pressures firsthand. And over the next few years, the state will likely become, again, a big testing ground for how America chooses to balance AI growth and economic opportunity along with infrastructure strain and community impact. So, as we wrap up this episode, the biggest takeaway from this week of news, I think, is that Texas continues to be branded as one of the leading places where the future of the AI economy is physically being built. From El Paso to Dallas Fort Worth to San Antonio to rural Texas communities across the state, the AI conversation continues to spark discussion and investment tied to infrastructure, workforce transformation, energy, and long-term economic development. And keep in mind, this is still early days. So thanks for listening to this episode of the IntoTexas AI podcast. If you want to continue getting insights on how AI is reshaping Texas, then I invite you to please continue listening, sharing, and of course, subscribe. I'm Shannon Belew. I'll see you next time.